Today is the most significant day of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's historic three-day visit to the United States, packed with bilateral talks with President Joe Biden, an address to a joint session of the US Congress, a rare honor for a world leader, followed by a state dinner at the White House. There is a lot of excitement over Prime Minister Modi's visit. Over 5,000 Indian Americans are expected to be present on the south lawns of the White House that you're looking at on your screens right now, when President Biden and the First Lady welcome Prime Minister Modi, complete with a 21-gun salute. Earlier, the Prime Minister was hosted by President Biden and First Lady Jill Biden for a private dinner at the White House. They were joined by US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and his Indian counterpart Ajit Doval. The White House was decked up with peacocks and lotus blooms, where a vegetarian dinner was hosted for the Indian Prime Minister. Subsequently, Prime Minister Modi visited the National Science Foundation in Virginia, accompanied by the First Lady. He said India's aim is to turn this decade into a tech decade or decade. Next, Prime Minister Modi met with the CEO of chipmaker Micron and the chief of General Electric. Just hours later, an MOU was signed between GE and Hindustan Aeronautics Limited for a game-changing defense deal, which will set into motion the joint manufacture of F-414 fighter jet engines in India under transfer of technology. Another big-ticket defense deal that's expected to be signed is the $3.5 billion deal, under which India will buy 31 Predator drones from an American company. Experts believe that apart from defense and trade, the two sides will also make progress in the areas of semiconductors, space cooperation, knowledge partnerships, civil nuclear cooperation, telecom and artificial intelligence. Long delays in issuance of American visas to India's and shared concern over China's growing belligerence and revisionism and its role in the Indo-Pacific are also certain to come up during these talks. On the show today, we're asking, can Prime Minister Modi's state visit turn the India-US relationship into one of the defining partnerships of our age, as the US National Security Advisor has put it? All right, let's now go straight across to our special guest, Ambassador Syed Akbaruddin, former permanent representative of India to the United Nations. Sir, thank you so much once again for joining us on a very important day. Now, US Ambassador to India Eric Garcetti has said this is what history feels like. The relationship has positively passed the point of no return. We have more than 100 deliverables. It's an all-arena partnership and the momentum is unstoppable. US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has said this will be one of the defining partnerships of our age. Do you agree? Is this visit by Prime Minister Modi taking us in that direction?
Neha, it's pretty clear that there is an extraordinary level of interest, both at a government-to-government level and an unparalleled excitement among a large number of people. Even by our own standards, where Prime Minister Modi has drawn large crowds, this is path-breaking in some ways. So obviously, the symbolism is there. You've listed a large array of agreements, and so it means the substance is also there. Maybe we are moving from what previously people used to call estranged democracies to embrace democracies. It's an era of change, and I think both Prime Minister Modi and President Biden seem to have grasped that and are pushing this and driving it through their own personal initiatives. You can see that the White House has taken control of this visit. National Security Advisor Sullivan was here. He worked on this. On the Indian side, you've seen Prime Minister and his National Security Advisor drive this. So we can clearly see that this is a all-of-government approach, indeed an all-of-country or all-of-society approach on both sides. Given that there is so much of commonality amongst us, there should not be any reason to think that this is an era which is new for us, and we hope it will only bring better things than what we've experienced in the past.
That certainly is the hope, sir. Now, I want to focus on specific areas. Most believe that the one area where this bilateral relationship is crossing new frontiers is the area of defense ties. A lot has been said and written about how technology transfer as part of the F-414 fighter jet engine deal will be a game changer. It's the holy grail of military aviation, and never before has the US shared this quote-unquote crown jewel of its defense capabilities with a non-ally. Is this a true reflection, you think, of just how important this relationship is now to the United States? Of course, it's equally true that the US is quite keen to wean India of its huge dependence on Russian weapon supplies.
So, those who know about these matters say uh, jet engines are more difficult to manufacture and produce than even nuclear weapons. So, you can understand the level of sophistication that goes into it. As you've yourself said, this is a niche area. The US has shared it only very sparingly. And in an era when the US talks of chip choking and friend shoring, it's pretty clear what they are looking towards India for, and that's friend shoring. Uh, the US National Security Advisor has talked of a small yard with high fences. It's nice to know that they're opening the fence for India to enter the yard. So it's pretty clear that defense is a cardinal feature, not only because it strengthens comprehensive national power, but also it has a spillover effect. That spillover effect is not only in the defense sector, but it happens also in the other parts of the economy. We gain skills, we gain technology, we gain experience, we gain through exchange of information and just working together. So it's a big deal, and let's acknowledge it for what it is.
Most certainly. But let me ask you this question, sir. Is it now abundantly clear to the United States that while India is a strong and important partner, it is not and will not be an ally? That alliances belong to the Cold War era and India will maintain its strategic autonomy? Are these deals of technology transfer, for instance, happening amid acceptance of this fact?
Neha, we are in an era where, to use a Hollywood term, most states see each other as frenemies. They cooperate in some areas, they compete in some areas. Or to use a business term, they call themselves in coopetition, that is, cooperation and competition. So I think it's pretty clear. For example, look at the US itself. It has serious challenges from China, yet its trade with China is $750 billion annually. So they know this thing very well, they understand it well, and from our part, you've clearly laid out, as have our leaders on many occasions, that alliances are not in our DNA, but we can be good partners, and others have seen how we have worked with them. These are times of nuances, so we will cooperate in areas where we want. They will work with us in areas they want, and it will give us both some space. It's a term that is undefined as yet. In political science or in international relations, we all know of alliances, junior partner, senior partner, but the arena of two big countries engaging with each other with no major divergences. They will have differences, but no major strategic divergences is a new concept, and I think everybody is struggling to give it a name.
I'm reminded of what Shakespeare said. What's in a name? But more seriously, you brought up China. Let's focus on China. There are evidently shared concerns over China's growing aggression, revisionism, and expansionism. US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has said Beijing flexing its muscle in the Indo-Pacific region and China's role in the military, economic, and technology domains will be on the agenda when the two leaders meet. Does the US want India, you believe, to be a strategic counterweight to China in Asia?
So that that China is a challenge to the US is well known. That China is a challenge to India is also well known. But I don't think you should reduce this expansive relationship only to the China factor. There are many other factors. For example, look at it from the Indian perspective. What does India needs for its economic development? We need technology, we need investment, we need skills. Given our challenges with China, we can only turn to the West, and who better in the West than the United States? Also, let's not forget that we have a huge diaspora which acts as a bridge. All these are China agnostic factors. They are not because of China, they predate China. Our interests are wider. Yes, we need to acknowledge that in some ways the China challenge has accelerated this. But to reduce it only to the China factor wouldn't be doing justice to what is a very broad relationship, which perhaps has been catalyzed further by the common challenges that both countries face.
All right. I promise you I'm not reducing it to the China factor alone. This is certainly a much, much broader and bigger relationship than that. But please indulge me as I ask you a couple of more questions on China before we move on. In the current geopolitical scenario, the two global poles, the US and China, as you mentioned, have intertwined economies, but there's also this great power rivalry. Is that the sweet spot that India enjoys today? And how best do you think New Delhi can leverage it?
So it's normal in an evolving situation. Everybody looks to maximize their interests. And yes, opportunities have arisen now, which were not there in the past for India, to engage much more deeply with the US. And one of the reasons clearly is the concerns that the US has of China, but there are other reasons too. India's growing market, its growing economy, US need for opportunities for their own industries to grow. They have realized that the old Washington consensus, which underpinned the global economy from, say, end of Second World War to the beginning of this century, is fraying. They're looking for new options, and India, the largest populated country in the world, amongst the fastest growing country in the world, provides those opportunities. So those opportunities are a convergence of interests, and convergence of interests are strong reasons for greater coalescence of views.
All right. Final question on China, I promise. Ties between the US and China are quite obviously strained. Soon after Blinken's visit to Beijing, Biden called Xi Jinping a dictator. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has obviously reacted quite angrily to that. But, the question that I want to ask you is, do you believe that despite that, India needs to seek clarity from the United States on how far it really plans to go in making amends in its ties with China? Is that something that should concern India?
Sure. I think clarity among partners is good for both sides. The US started by saying there were trends towards decoupling. Today, it's not talking of decoupling, but talking of de-risking. So you can clearly see that there has been a shift. As far as our relations with China are concerned, frankly, India is capable of standing on its own. What it needs is other assistance, not boots on the ground. We can handle that ourselves. We are a large country. But it is good to have clarity on what's the trajectory of their ties, because everybody in an evolving situation hedges. And if the US doesn't want to hedge, us to hedge too much, they need to provide that clarity. And that's a fair ask from the US.
All right, very interesting. And this is something that is bound to come up in talks between Prime Minister Modi and President Biden. Let's now move on. Sir, we've talked about many areas of convergence, including, of course, defense cooperation and some unprecedented defense deals that are on the cards. But let's now talk about areas of divergence, because these would exist between any two friends. Now, Prime Minister Modi told the Wall Street Journal in the context of the Russia-Ukraine war, some people say we're neutral, but we're not neutral, we're on the side of peace. Interestingly, on the day when Prime Minister Modi arrived in the US, the Russian ambassador to India said, Russia will continue to meet India's energy needs. This is obviously a sore point for the United States, and it's evident that the US and India do not see eye to eye on the Ukraine war and Russia's role in it. How do you think the two sides are likely to address these differences?
So let's take the smaller point before we go to the larger thing. The oil issue. Frankly, I think it's a storm in a teacup. Let me tell you why. Who designed these unilateral economic measures? The US and the West. What did they design this? They designed that oil could be sold in an unrestricted manner if it was sold below a certain price threshold. And they did this so not out of any philanthropic reason or anything, but because they realized that if you dry up Russian oil, the challenge will be that the price of oil will skyrocket. So they devised this process. There are no restrictions on purchase of oil by anyone below the threshold. So India's found it as a good transactional opportunity to maximize its gains, purchase the oil, use it domestically, and then refine it and sell to whoever wants it in the world. So frankly, I don't think that this is a real issue at all, because those who designed it knew what they were coming off. In some ways, they were blindsided that they did not perhaps realize that there would be people who would use the opportunity to maximize their interests, and we've done it very well. So frankly, I don't see the US and India being on very divergent on oil-related issues, because it was Treasury Secretary Yellen who designed these unilateral measures, which they call sanctions. Leave that aside. The bigger picture about the differences on Ukraine. Now, India and US have very different historical experiences. We come from not only different geographical regions, but our own history of engagement has been different from that of the US. And therefore, we are not going to be mirror images of what any country in the world wants. We are sui generis. You can't expect anything but that from a country of 1.4 billion population. So the challenge, the differences in diplomacy are usual. The challenge is that diplomats need to try and bridge those differences. And by all accounts, that has worked well at the diplomatic level. I'm not saying at the public diplomacy level, but at the diplomatic level. Otherwise, the US wouldn't have calculated the way it has done, opened up this vast expanse of exchanges, given these sort of welcome to Prime Minister Modi, and the areas of engagement have broadened in so many ways. So they've calculated that the differences are there, but they are playing what some call the long game, which means that you give in something now for a later strategic gain. It's a call they have taken, despite the dissonance that comes out sometimes by some rump elements. I would think that that decision has been taken. It's a carefully thought over decision, and I would think that's the right decision too.
Absolutely, and it is evident given that, President Biden is holding only the third state visit for a world leader since he took office. But let me now talk about another issue which is very important to Indians, sir. The issue of endless visa delays. It's led to much frustration among Indians. Many have pointed out that while citizens of China, with which the US has strained ties, get an American visa in no time, the wait for Indians is 2 to 3 years. This when the US says India is a very important partner. Can we expect the US administration to make some big announcement on this front?
You've talked to Ambassador Garcetti recently. I haven't, but when he was in Hyderabad maybe about a month ago, he did indicate that we can expect some big announcement on this during the visit. And let's hope, not purely because of state-to-state ties, But let's not forget, Indians who travel to the USA are the best bridge between India and the US. And it does not behove a country to cut off ties with the best friends that they have in our country. So I would think US is the US leadership is wise. Their diplomats are very clever. They've worked it out, and hopefully we should find some movement which will better the situation than it was before, because the past situation for the last year or so is frankly unsustainable.
It is unsustainable to think that sometimes you have to wait for 2 years to even get that visa interview. Since we are talking about areas of divergence and dissonance, I also want to bring this up. 75 senators and congressional representatives of the Democratic Party have written to President Biden asking him to raise with Prime Minister Modi areas of concern such as press and religious freedoms in India and the country's human rights record. They say friends should speak in an honest and forthright way. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has said Biden will raise US concerns about democratic backsliding in India, but he will not lecture Modi on the subject. He says when we see challenges to press, religious and other freedoms, we make our views known. How do you think this prickly issue is likely to be addressed by the two sides?
So let's start off with basics. Dissent in democracies is normal. And therefore, if the US administration has taken a considered approach, and there are some in their Congress or Senate who have different views, that's normal in democracies. And so we can expect that. Having said that, I think the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, has put it well, that they have, if they want to, raise it in a manner which is unobtrusive. Frankly, there are many things that we can raise to. Not only, I'm not talking about their domestic affairs, but the way they've handled many things. That they have given arms to Pakistan and provided opportunities for weaponry to be used against us. That they left Afghanistan in such a mess that we had that all of us are still struggling with the fallout. We will also raise these issues in a calibrated manner. There's no harm. They may have a view. I don't think their view is correct, but sovereign countries have a right to exchange views in a manner where they feel that the other side understands them best. This is not new. Many countries raise different issues with us, and our diplomats and our leaders know how to respond to them. After all, a democracy is for us a way of life. It's not only a way of government. And as Indians, we live and breathe in a spirit of democracies, as they say. The argumentative Indian is not new. According to Amartya Sen himself, goes back a tradition of 1,000 years. So discussions, deliberations, conversations, if done respectfully, can easily be handled. But let's not forget, we have not much to worry about, because for every one engaged view that you have, we could explain. Nobody can understand our country better than us, so we can put forth our point of view respectfully, not in a defensive manner, but to assure our friends that they need not worry about issues which are lying primarily within the realm of domestic jurisdiction. We are a country of 1 billion plus. We know we will have challenges, and we will handle them the best way that we can.
That's very well put, sir, undoubtedly. Defense and trade, many believe, are really going to be the defining features, not just of this visit, but also of the India-US relationship going forward. We've talked about, some path-breaking defense deals that are likely to be announced during this visit. Let's now talk about trade. Even though the United States is India's largest trade partner, with bilateral trade in 2020 pegged at almost $129 billion. Fact is, trade ties haven't grown between the two countries at a pace that one would have expected. Some have pointed out that India must leverage, as you mentioned, friendshoring to deepen trade ties with the US. The US complains that India's protectionism remains an obstacle. Is this visit likely to change some of that?
So, if the trajectory of our ties have to go to the next level, trade and economic ties will be a bedrock of that growth. And so we acknowledge that. Having said that, let's be clear that the blame can be apportioned in many ways. It depends on how you see it. The US today is not in a position to enter into any trade agreement for reasons of their own. There are issues of workers' rights, environmental issues, concerns of the middle class in the US, etc., etc. But creative ways have to be found through engagement in global value chains. And I think that's a better way, because trade will only grow not because of government-to-government cooperation or what governments do, but if benefits are seen by the private sector and corporates. And I think companies like Apple have shown that they can do in 2 years, utilizing opportunities provided by the PLI scheme in India, what companies have not been able to do for decades. Apple today exports something like $8 billion worth of equipment in less than 2 years. So there are creative avenues. It's up to our corporates to work with US corporates, utilize opportunities that are available here and in the US. Let's not forget, India is a big investor in the US too. Something like $40 billion is invested by many companies there. Pharma companies are invested in US. So there are opportunities. It's only once you get to work with each other more, you will find opportunities, and that's what governments are doing to facilitate that.
A couple of questions more, sir, before we let you go. Now, a touch of personal warmth is being extended to Prime Minister Modi during this visit. President Biden and the First Lady hosted the Prime Minister at a private event at the White House before the state dinner. President Biden is likely to accompany the Prime Minister to a tech event. And over the years, we've seen a growing personal rapport between the two leaders, including some very warm hugs. As someone who's been a diplomat for a very long time and has seen many Indian and world leaders from close quarters, what do you make of the bonhomie and personal chemistry between these two leaders? And according to you, is this an important element of foreign relations, or do we hype it up too much?
No. Personal chemistry is intrinsic to a degree of conviviality in the relationship. And Prime Minister Modi always works very hard on his interpersonal relations with other leaders. He plans everything meticulously. For example, I've seen it happen many times, and it's happened again here. Look at the type of gifts given. He personally spends quite a lot of time looking at them, deciding on them, and doing a lot of research people do before they come up with these submissions. So personal chemistry is important. It can be the icing on the cake, but the cake also has to be of a quality that the icing can be worthy of it. So in this case, the cake is good and the icing is better.